Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I know we have some people out of town. We need to keep that in mind, and we still must have a lot of people still sick. The numbers are down a little bit this morning. Before we begin class this morning, Dad, would you start us off with a word of prayer?
Precious God in heaven, once again we come before you giving thanks for all the many wonderful things that you do and provide for us. We know without you in our lives, Father, none of the things we could ever stop. As we continue to this time of life, we ask that you take watch on each and every one of us. Give us that much sacrifice and we can turn from. These things we do that in the name of your son Jesus. Amen. Amen.
Okay, we are studying in Exodus chapter 40. In fact, we are going to finish Exodus chapter 40 this morning, but go ahead and open up your Bibles to chapter 40. And at this point in our study, the Israelites have made all the items and all the furniture for the tabernacle. Moses has inspected all those items in the furniture, and they had done all the work as God had commanded. And Moses blesses them. Then God tells Moses to set up or raise up the tabernacle on the first day of the first month, which would be in the course of the second year, which they do. And in Exodus 40, verse 16, thus Moses did according to all that the Lord had commanded him, so he did. And at the end of verse 33, so Moses finished the work. So as we move into verse 34 here, the tabernacle, all the items have been built and the tabernacle has been raised. And God was pleased with all of that, wasn't he? Because we read several times, we've already said 18 times in the chapters 39 and 40, we read as the Lord had commanded. So this morning, let's start off by reading verses 34 and 35 of Exodus chapter 40. And Jim, would you read that? Exodus 40, verses 34 and 35.
Then the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tabernacle of meeting because the cloud rested above it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle.
Okay, so the tabernacle's all built, everything's good, everybody's happy. What do we see happening next? God moves in, you might say, right? Yes. After the tabernacle's raised, the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses couldn't go in because the cloud was there, and the glory of the God filled the tabernacle. So he's pleased with everything that's been done, and you might say that he's moved into his place here on earth, his dwelling place here on earth. And this is when it says the cloud, we know we're talking about the pillar of cloud. And it says here, his glory filled the tabernacle. Do we know when this happened, what we're just reading about? Do we know when this happened? Go ahead, Carl.
From this verses here, was the cloud over the tabernacle all the time? Well, it said Moses couldn't go in because the cloud was there. If the cloud was there all the time, how could they go in and do what they were supposed to do?
This one, the pillar of cloud is over the tabernacle. As we read all through their journeys, we'll see that later. It was over the tabernacle all through their journeys. If it moved, that's when they moved. Here, what I get from it is the cloud went down into like the tabernacle. It was filled. So Moses knew not to go in. Normally it was above the tabernacle, and this was like he kind of moved into the tabernacle. So there is some kind of a difference here. I can't tell you exactly what it was, because yes, that's the way it's described, is the pillar of cloud was over the tabernacle. But here, this says it covered the tabernacle. So rather than just being above it, it kind of enveloped it all at this point. Moses didn't go in until that changed. But do we know what time this happened? If you were here Wednesday, you should know that answer.
On the day the tabernacle was raised?
Exactly. Let's turn to Numbers chapter 9. Chris talked about a timeline and different things happening, and there was a lot of stuff happening after that tabernacle got built. But here, let's read Numbers chapter 9 and verse 15. And Carl, would you read that?
What verse?
Numbers 9, verse 15.
15.
15.
And on the day that the tabernacle was reared up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, namely the tent of the testimony. And at evening there was upon the tabernacle as it were the appearance of fire until the morning.
Okay, so they get the tabernacle raised up, and this cloud that would normally be above them that showed them where to go covers the tabernacle. And how long was it there? From evening till morning. That's right. So on the same day the tabernacle was raised up, that's when that happened. From evening till morning, Moses or anybody didn't go in because this cloud was covering it all.
And at night it turned to fire.
At night it did, yes. And there were some things I hadn't thought about. Me and Chris had talked about some dates before, but I thought Wednesday's class was very interesting how Chris went through how many things were happening during the first 12, 14, well, actually longer than that, because you went into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So after the tabernacle was raised, it was only 2 weeks later was Passover. Then they had the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is another 7 days. But before that even happened, we had Moses and Aaron and his sons going into the tabernacle, having to stay there for 7 days. And then the Israelites, each tribe, the leader of each tribe was giving an offering every day for 12 days. There was a lot happening here during this first month or so after the tabernacle was raised, which was very interesting. But anyway, this cloud that covered the tabernacle, you might say God moved in to his dwelling place there on earth, happened on the same day the tabernacle was raised. Any comments on any of this so far? Go ahead, Carl.
Undoubtedly, it says when the cloud was taken up, the children of Israel moved. But before they could move, they had to take all of this tabernacle down and load it up how they had been instructed to. So we're not given all of the details, how, who took this down and so on and so forth, but we know that when the cloud went up, they left. But how long did it take them to get ready before they could take off?
Well, they put it up in a day. So I would say they probably could take it down in a day. And since you brought that up, let's talk about it later, but if we look at, let me get to my notes here on the right page. In Numbers chapter 4, verse 48, they take a census of the Levites. And the census, there was 2 censuses actually. One of them was from a month old to whenever. And the second census they took of the Levites was the ages 30 to 50. And what we read about in Numbers 4, verse 48, is that number of Levites there were from ages 30 to 50. And that number was 8,580 men. So it would not take very long for 8,580 men to put the tabernacle up or take it down. That's a lot of people. Right? Granted, there's a lot of work. And those sockets alone, we figured they were 75 pounds, roughly 75 pounds each. But there was a lot of men to do this work. So you could see that it would get done easily in a day. And they could, more than likely, they would be able to take it down in a day also if they could put it up in a day, because that's a lot of men to do the work. And that's if, we don't know the first time it went up, if all the Israelites joined in, because nothing was sacred or nothing had been consecrated yet. All the Israelites might have helped put it together, we don't know. But even if it was just the Levites, they had over 8,500 men to do that. So there was a lot of them to do that. But it was a lot of work, but they had a lot of men to do it. Now out of that 8,500, I didn't separate the amounts. The ones that were the sons of Kohath, to me, that was the ones that had the work. The sons of Gershom and the sons of Merari were the ones that packed up the curtains and packed up the boards and all that, but they had carts. The sons of Kohath, they carried the furniture on their shoulders. So when they moved from here to there, not only did they have to take all the tabernacle down, but the sons of Kohath, they had some work involved there. They carried that on their shoulders. Carrying that Ark of the Testimony for very far would have been, of course, there was a lot of men, but they would have definitely had been taking turns doing this. Any other comments? Go ahead, Katie.
I thought it was, when I was reading that, it was like, it was a visual representation to the Israelites that God kept his promise to Moses to stay with them when he inhabited the tabernacle. And I can't imagine how they must have felt seeing this happen for the first time.
After what happened in Exodus chapter 32, Moses up on the mountain, receiving the law for them, and they make a golden calf. From that point up to this point, they haven't done anything wrong, have they? They understood how angry God was. I think Moses was very worried, wasn't he? We've read that before. Moses was very, very concerned. God was so angry. And I think that communicated to the people. I think we really messed up this time. We need to do what's right. Because all through this, all this work and all this stuff, with the tabernacle, repeatedly we're told they did everything exactly the way God had commanded Moses. So, yes, and we're going to talk about that very thing just a little bit later, about his presence. Go ahead, Carl.
And all this time, with all of these animals, they were still being fed by manna.
Yes. And quail in the evening, yes. So as we've said before, even in chapter 32, Moses is on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and they ask Aaron to make him an idol because they don't know what's going on with Moses. Well, pillar of cloud and pillar of fire and the manna and the quail are still there every day, just like they were. So God's still there. Why they, we don't know what was going through their head, but it kind of makes you scratch your head. They're still getting the food every day. Pillar of cloud was there in the day, and the pillar of fire was still there at night. But they thought they needed an idol, and I'm not sure why that would have been, but yes. Let's go ahead now and read the last 3 verses of chapter 40. Exodus 40, verses 36 through 38. And Katie, would you read those?
Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, the children of Israel would go onward in all their journeys. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not journey until the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day, and fire was over it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys.
So how did they know when to move? When the cloud moved, it's time to move. We're going to read that later, and it didn't matter what time of day. It could have been at night, because it references that the pillar of cloud even moved at night. So someone had to be awake and alert. Of course, they probably had sentries. They're out in the middle of the desert, yes, but you still want to have somebody on guard just in case. So whoever was on guard, it's moving. We got to get up, wake up. But anyway, yes, we read about this, and we read about this repeatedly, that we knew, that's how they knew when to go. The pillar of cloud was over the tabernacle. We don't know exactly how, but over it during the day, and at night the pillar of fire was above the tabernacle. When that moved, that's when they moved. Let's go ahead and turn back to Exodus chapter 13. And let's read verses 20 to 22. Exodus 13, verses 20 to 22. And Stacy, would you read that?
So they took their journey from Succoth and camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night and a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people.
Okay, so this is, they just barely left Egypt, and we're reading this, right? So what we're reading about in chapter 40 is nothing new, is it? Now there's now a tabernacle for him, the pillar to hover over, but they always had this pillar of cloud and pillar of fire with them since they left Egypt. God was with them along the way, and it says to lead the way and to give them light, because it says here they traveled by day and night when they first left Egypt. We don't know if that was all the time, but we do have a reference about them traveling other times at night. But yes, so this isn't anything different. A pillar of cloud, a pillar of fire, since they left Egypt. And now, again, we read about more specifically here in chapter 40. But let's turn over back to Numbers chapter 9 again. This is repetitive, but kind of a lengthy reading, but I like some of the things that was said here, so we're going to go ahead and read this. Numbers chapter 9, and let's read verses 16 to 23. And this is referencing the same thing about the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. And Summer, would you read that? Numbers 9, verses 16 to 23.
So it was always. The cloud covered it by day, and the appearance of fire by night. Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, after that the children of Israel would journey. And in the place where the cloud settled, there the children of Israel would pitch their tents. At the command of the Lord, the children of Israel would journey, and at the command of the Lord they would camp. As long as the cloud stayed above the tabernacle, they remained encamped. Even when the cloud continued long, many days above the tabernacle, the children of Israel kept the charge of the Lord and did not journey. So it was, when the cloud was above the tabernacle a few days, according to the command of the Lord, they would remain encamped, and according to the command of the Lord, they would journey. So it was when the cloud remained only from evening until morning, when the cloud was taken up in the morning, then they would journey. Whether by day or by night, whenever the cloud was taken up, they would journey. Whether it was 2 days, a month, or a year, that the cloud remained above the tabernacle, the children of Israel would remain encamped and not journey. But when it was taken up, they would journey. At the command of the Lord, they remained encamped, and at the command of the Lord, they journeyed. And they kept the charge of the Lord, and at the command of the Lord by the hand of Moses.
Again, we talked about repetition in the Bible before. Do you think God's trying to make something clear here to us? Absolutely, yes. We see here repeatedly, we're told, as long as that pillar of cloud or pillar of fire remained above the tabernacle, they didn't budge, because that's what God wanted. But they had to be ready to move at any time, because they didn't know when it was going to be. As it says here, it could be 2 days, it could be a month, it could be a year, they didn't know. But whenever that pillar of cloud or pillar of fire, even at night, when it moved, they moved. How did they know where to go?
Followed the cloud.
They followed the cloud. How did they know when to stop?
Right.
When the cloud stopped, that's where you camp. This is right. So who's in charge of all this? God. He told them when to move, and he told them where to move. Exactly.
Very question. When God told Moses that I will not go among you because I will consume you, would the cloud and the pillar have gone, or would it just have been the angel? Because the pillar and cloud represented God.
Right. I can't really answer that, because there's times, well, when we read about the Egyptians, when they're at the Red Sea, and the pillar of cloud moved in between the Egyptians and the Israelites, it said the angel went back between them, and it also said the pillar went with them. That cloud, it separated them. It was darkness for the Egyptians, but it was light for the Israelites, so they could cross the Red Sea. That gives the inference that the pillar was the angel. I'm not saying that's for sure, but that's the inference that I get from that. So to me, almost would seem that if he sent the angel would go with him. I think he was referencing this pillar of cloud and pillar. It is a representation of God, but that's the way I take it. Is that the way you take it, Chris? Yes. I think that's, when they reference an angel, I think they're referencing this pillar of cloud and pillar of fire. That's why they knew that he was there with them. So here in verse, well, several times we're told, at the command of the Lord, the children of Israel would journey. At the command of the Lord, they would camp. Here in Numbers chapter 9. God was in charge. He was, when and where, they did exactly what he told them to do. This is what he wanted, and that's how he directed them. Now let's go back. I want to look at something again at the last verse of chapter 40 of Exodus. Let's go back there. There's other verses we can read about this, but we get the idea. Pillar of cloud was over the tabernacle during the day. A pillar of fire was over it by night. When that cloud moved, that's when the Israelites moved. If the cloud didn't move or the fire didn't move, they stayed put right where they ever were. They didn't go anywhere. Okay, now back to Exodus chapter 40 and verse 38. What I found interesting is this is the last verse of the book of Exodus. And look what we're talking about. For the cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day, and the fire was over it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. So this ends with God being with them, and he stayed with them, doesn't it? Now, how would that have affected the Israelites?
They should have been aware that God was with them.
They should have been anyway, granted. But you can almost, again, when the Bible's written not in a way that gets its emotions involved. It's just matter of fact, this is what happened. But as we read through this and they finish this tabernacle, you can almost see that the Israelites were excited about this. They did the right thing, and Moses, I think, was excited about this, and all this was going on, and they were happy. And here at this point, God's happy too, isn't he? And now the book of Exodus ends with God is with them. Fire in the cloud, God was with them throughout all their journeys. And then we read in Exodus 13, talking about the same thing. I didn't write that in my notes, but I did want to reference it. So let me get back there. You don't have to turn back there, but in Exodus 13, verse 22, he did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people. It didn't stop. And there was a reference to the same thing in Numbers 9. It said, sorry, I didn't write this in my notes, but I did want to refer to it. It starts off, well, we read verse 15, pillar of cloud and pillar of fire, and the cloud covered the tabernacle in verse 16. So it was always. So this isn't something that God was always there with them. Since they left Egypt until we're reading about right here, God was with them. And it goes on beyond that here in chapter 40 throughout all their journeys. So all those 40 years, God was right there with them. This pillar of cloud and pillar of fire never went away. The quail and the manna never went away. That didn't stop till they went into the promised land. So all through this, as we're reading about all this in this 40 years, God's with them through all of this. Even though they had done what they had done, God was with them, which is, I thought, should have been very, very comforting to the Israelites. Let's flip over now to the book of Nehemiah. Chapter 9. Nehemiah chapter 9, and we're going to read verse 19. And Hilda, would you like to read that?
Yet in your manifold mercy, you did not forsake them in the wilderness. The pillar of the cloud did not depart from them by day, to lead pillar of fire by night to show them the light and the way they should go.
Okay, again, we already talked about God guided them where to go and when to go. And he never did leave them. All these journeys, God was there with them all this time. And we're going to, as we continue on, we already know the Israelites continued to make mistakes. God was always with them. Go ahead, Carl.
God was always there. We read from these verses, yet all of this time in the wilderness, they didn't circumcise the men like they were supposed to. And then they didn't even know what the law was. It's hard to believe that if God was there with them every day with the cloud and the fire at night. So it had to be some hard-headed.
And they've already been told at this point already. I mean, we have got a lot of the law to go through yet. Right? The whole book of Leviticus is going to be all law. But already they've already learned. God's already said, teach your children, read the book, learn, and teach your children and your grandchildren. Did they do that? No. And we are from the book of Joshua, yeah, we learned that all the time they were in the 40 years in the wilderness, they didn't circumcise their children the way they were supposed to. Joshua had to do it later on. So yeah, even though God was there all these years, supplying them manna, supplying them quail, supplying them water, the pillar of fire was with them to guide them, the pillar of cloud, they still didn't do what they should have done. But that thought to me was, like I said, this should have been very comforting to the Israelites, knowing it didn't matter what time of day it was. They could look up and either there's a cloud there or there's fire there. God's with us. And they continue to get food. God's with us. What about us today? Can we consider a lesson for us?
My word will prevail forever, and we still have his word, and we have all the lessons and proofs and evidences. The rainbow still is in the sky.
Well, God guided them, right? He guided them on the way they should go. Can that be said about us? Does God guide us?
We have the word.
That's what we're doing right now, is studying the word. Go ahead, Carl.
That holds true today. You give a person everything they need, everything they want, they won't appreciate it if they don't have to work for it. That holds true today, and it seems like that kind of like it was back then. God was furnishing everything for them, and they didn't appreciate what God was doing for them.
Well, no doubt. They did have to go out and gather the manna and prepare it, and they did have to go out and gather the quail. There were some things they were doing, but yes, God made it easy enough for them that it was almost like they were entitled to it or something, like people nowadays feel like things that they think are entitled for, but they're not. But yeah, there's a lesson here for us. God never left them. God doesn't leave us either. If something happens to separate us from God, who did that?
We did.
I did. If I get separated from God, it's my fault. God doesn't leave, I leave. God guides us and he does not leave us. Let's turn and read. I'm going to run out of time, but I still want to read this let's turn and read Colossians 3, verse 17. And Chris, would you read that?
And whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him.
So as we live our life, is God guiding us as Christians? Absolutely. We are to follow this word, the new law. If we do so, whatever we do in word or deed, our speech or our actions, if we do all in the name of the authority of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him, is God not guiding us? Is God not with us? Yes. One other verse, let's turn to Hebrews 13:5, which is a verse we've read many times. Leo, would you read that? Hebrews 13, verse 5.
Let your conduct be without witnessness, be content in such things as you have, for he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you.
Okay, is God making a promise here? Yes, he has promised us. Did he not make a promise in Genesis chapter 9 that he would never destroy the world again by flood? And we have the rainbow to see that promise is still there. This is a promise we're reading from God that he will, as a Christian, if we're doing what we're supposed to do, God is not going to forsake us, ever. And we've said before, in the English it says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. But in the original Greek, it's like, I will never, ever, ever leave you or forsake you. It's very dogmatic. So the same things we're reading about the Israelites can be applied to us. God is guiding us daily, and God will never leave us. Same things. Any comments in any of that? Okay. We're going to go ahead and turn back to Deuteronomy chapter 4. Some of the things I was going to say we're going to have to cut short here, but we're not going to read this, but because we've read it before, Deuteronomy 4, verses 15 through 19, we read here that when God appeared to the Israelites, when God spoke the 10 Commandments to the Israelites did not see any kind of a form. Not any kind of a form like a male or a female or an animal or a bird or a fish, anything. And he did that for a reason. He did not want to have them see a form and make an idol out of it, period. And that's what we read about here in Deuteronomy 4, verses 15 through 19. And with good reason. Were they idolatrous before he took them out of Egypt? Yes. And already, since they've left, they've already been idolatrous. So he had reason for that. So if he wasn't going to show them any kind of a form, there were times that God wanted them to know his presence was there. How did he do it? We've already talked about it, the cloud and the pillar. It was always with them. But there isn't any kind of a form or anything for them to try to make an idol out of. It's either a cloud or a fire. So you can see God's wisdom here. He didn't give them anything to grab onto to try to make an idol out of. But he still had that. They still knew his presence was with them. When they saw that, God's with us. Now, in doing so, while we're right here in Deuteronomy chapter 4, let's read verses 11 and 12. We read these same items, cloud and fire, right here. So Deuteronomy 4, verses 11 and 12. Joetta, would you read that?
Then you came near and stood at the door of the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire to the midst of heaven with darkness, cloud, and thick darkness. And the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of the words, but saw no form. You only heard a voice. Okay, here he talks about fire, he talks about darkness, he talks about cloud, and he talks about thick darkness. No, not just darkness, but thick darkness. But yeah, we read the fire and the cloud still there. They knew God was with them. These items were there. And in Exodus 24, when Moses went up on the mountain, what did we read about? Cloud covering Mount Sinai, and the Lord came down like a consuming fire on the mountain, cloud and fire. When Moses, after they made the golden calf, Moses took his tent, remember, and moved it outside of the camp and called it the tabernacle. How did they know when God was there talking to Moses? The cloud came down at the door of the tabernacle. So again, we read about this cloud and this fire all the time. That's how God let them know, I'm there, my presence is there. We read about that constantly all through all this. Let's turn now to Leviticus 16 and verse 2.
We've read earlier, and I even read some verses from the other places in the Old Testament where God is referred to as the one who dwelt between the cherubim or on the mercy seat, because that's where he spoke to them from. But let's read here at Leviticus 16, verse 2. And Mom, would you read that?
And the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron your brother not to come at just any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat, which is on the ark, lest he die, for I will appear in the cloud above the mercy seat.
So even, we already knew that God spoke to the Israelites and Aaron and Moses from the mercy seat. But when he did so, cloud was there. I hadn't noticed that before. So the Israelites, God used cloud and fire to let them know, I'm here, I'm with you. They still knew his presence was with them. Just from that, without giving them a form to try to make an idol of. I thought that was interesting. God was doing his best to keep them from doing things wrong. But still they knew his presence was there. Any comments on any of that? But we don't have much time left, but turning over to the New Testament, let's turn to Matthew chapter 17. Something that should be familiar to us. God didn't stop using the cloud in the Old Testament, did he? In Matthew chapter 17, we're going to read verse 5, but this is the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus took Peter, James, and John and went up on the mountain. He was transfigured. And then Peter tells, and Moses and Elijah appear there with Jesus, and Peter says, it's good for us to be here. We're going to make a tabernacle or an altar, one for you and one for Moses, one for Elijah. Now let's read verse 5. Terry, would you read that, Matthew 17, 5?
While he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And behold, a voice out of the cloud which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him.
So what overshadowed them? A cloud. So there they are. Jesus is talking to Moses and Elijah, and we know from other verses what they were talking about. They were talking about Jesus' death. And Peter, from other verses we read that Peter didn't know exactly what to say. So this just came out of his mouth. You know, Peter liked to be the spokesman. He liked to say something. So the only thing he could think of saying was, let's make an altar, one for you and one for Moses, one for Elijah. And as he is saying this, this cloud comes down upon them and they hear this voice from the cloud. What is being represented there? The Father's presence, is it not? Because the voice says, what? This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him. You don't need to listen to Elijah or Moses anymore. God's making a point. This is my son. Those days are gone. Moses was a great prophet. Elijah represents prophets. Moses kind of, in a way, represents the word, the law. That's done away with. Jesus is here now. The new law is going to be coming soon. So, but again, God's presence here came through the cloud. So even though we read about it a lot in the Old Testament, it didn't stop in the Old Testament. We still get the same idea. And Peter was a Jew, was he not? And the apostles, but James and John specifically here, they would have been reading about these same stories we're reading about the cloud. So you think maybe that's what hit home to them? As they're up there on the mountain with Jesus and this cloud comes down, that's where my mind would have went, wow, this is just like when they were wandering in the wilderness, a cloud, and the Father spoke to us. So I thought that was interesting. But about out of time. Is there any comments on any of this so far? Good, because we don't have any time to make any more comment anyway. But I don't know if Chris has anything else he wants to cover from Exodus. But if not, be prepared to start in the book of Leviticus on Wednesday.